Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChainArgos. Thank you for tuning in wherever you get your podcast from. It's a legitimate statement.
They come from somewhere.
And thanks for all the likes, comments, and subscribes. We appreciate that. Of course, thank you for all the shout-outs for the ThorChain stuff from last week. I'm glad you guys enjoyed that. Much more coming along. What are we going to talk about this week? Of course, with me, as usual, every week, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, John and Reiter. What are we going to talk about this week? The ape punk shotgun attack. I never thought I would see those words in a sentence, but here we are. John's got all the dish on that. The UK Bitcoin ATM prosecution. Again, John has some information about that. Finally, we'll go to a bit of data. The Wall Street Journal used our data sometime this week. I forget when. On Tether. So I've got a little bit more in-depth data for you guys that didn't actually make it to the press. You know how it is behind the scenes sometimes. Not all of the data is going to make it to the press, so I'll share a bit more of that with you guys. And also my comments on some interesting partnerships towards the end of the show that are related to that Wall Street Journal piece. But more on that later. Let's just jump straight into it. John, I never thought I'd be saying this, but please tell me about the ape punk shotgun attack, because that sounds like it could have happened in real life.
So there's an NFT series. It doesn't matter what the NFT series was. And then one of the NFTs in that series was put into a fractionalization platform. So I don't actually remember how many were in the original series, and then they got broken into 10,000 fractional ownership of that NFT. Okay, so this is fractional ownership in the same way that you can stick equities in a trust and then sell secure certificates, and you get a fraction of the ownership of the equity. That's how you do fractional share trading, all that kind of thing. So the underlying financial technology, such as it is pretty well settled. So what happened here about the platform is it wasn't simply put an asset in a box and sell certificates for fractional ownership of the contents of that box. It also had a shotgun facility where an owner could propose something like a mandatory tender offer. So for those of you who are familiar with traditional equity, corporate, whatever actions, that's a thing. What it means is I'm going to pay X for each outstanding share, fractional ownership certificate of this protocol, and if there's no dispute, whatever, it finally gets passed, then everybody has to sell them to me at that price, right? So when a company buys another company, this is one of the types of things that get used to say we've agreed a deal at either a stock ratio or a cash payment at a certain price, and the stock just gets converted into cash or into shares in a different company at that rate. So here you can propose one of these shotgun, and clearly it's a reference to things like shotgun weddings, which is a joke about somebody standing there with a shotgun and it happens fast. So here it's here's a bid, and if nobody effectively places a higher bid to cancel the first bid, everybody has to sell at that price. So this person put through one of these shotgun bids that worked out to a price way below where the supposed market price for this whole NFT was. And they tried once, it got sniped out. They tried again, it got done, and then they bought the whole thing at a massive discount, which they apparently then sold. Although you don't really have a way of knowing if it was sold to somebody else or that's just back to their main collection account, whatever it is. So this is interesting because of course, the code's all visible, but the fractionalization platform had gone offline. So when people say things like the front end's not really legally important because you can always interact with the smart contracts, the problem here was that no one knew how to interact with the smart contracts. Not even necessarily because they were poorly documented and confusing, which they were a little bit, but because most people don't work that way, and they certainly don't work that way if there's a nice veneer that's sitting on top of the whole thing, do it in the first place. So that was much more challenging. Apparently one of the holders made some sort of effort to submit the correct whatever transaction function called, to stop this bidding process, but wasn't able to stop it in time. Although I think it was a 14-day window, so this is a little bit like the compound thing we talked about a few weeks ago, where if absolutely no one is paying attention, appeals to like a stable equilibrium arrangement where, rely on incentives. I mean, the evidence is that literally no one was looking. So you're not in a stable equilibrium. You just walked away from the product. So these are not good arguments about stability and regulatory, whatever, functional, survivable, robust systems. And then another commentator remarked that people should use platforms like his platform. He works for Van Eck, which is a equity broker that has a NFT fractionalization tool, and their argument is essentially our tool is completely centralized and it's referred to as a closed ecosystem, and we vet that people don't have features like this in their contracts, and only the owner of the token of the project can make these types of changes, so you'll be fine. I don't entirely understand that argument, because it's just saying instead of trusting the code you can read, trust them to not allow problems through. Which, if they're willing to take responsibility for it, fair enough, I suppose. But that's kind of the opposite of the entire purpose and ethos of these things. But it does seem to be required for end users to like it, which is telling you that the ethos of the space may be incompatible with the products that those who wish to espouse that ethos want to use. Which is interesting. There you go.
All right.
So that's where we are.
Moving along, let's talk a little bit about...
Oh, and I should say, I think this issue where platforms go offline and then trouble ensues as more and more platforms go offline. Because a lot of these platforms came around with the last big hype cycle about 2-3 years ago, and they'll be running out of money and shutting down now. So this is going to be a thing.
It's going to be a thing. So let's talk about the UK Bitcoin ATMs, because that's pretty funny.
Yeah, so... Okay, so the UK has some kind of crypto trading licensing regime. We're not going to talk about the merits of that regime. We're going to acknowledge they have some kind of regime. And the government has come out and said publicly that all Bitcoin ATMs operating in the UK are illegal because while there are dozens of companies with licenses of various sorts,
correct,
none of them are licensed to provide Bitcoin ATMs. And it's an interesting situation where they're like, look, a license exists and no one has it. So if you see one of these, it's illegal.
Yep.
Okay. You see cars with license plates on them, but you can't always tell if the registration's valid. Right? It's a little bit harder. Now, in this case, someone is being criminally prosecuted for activities related to the Bitcoin ATM network that they were operating. It's a few $1 million, a few £1 million worth of volume through these Bitcoin ATMs. As I understand it from the press release and the reporting, he's being charged with two types of offenses. The first, which is directly related to the ATMs, is receiving, holding, possessing stolen property, so proceeds of crime. Exactly whether that crime is that the money was stolen from somebody else and he was holding it, that hasn't been made clear yet. So that is directly related to Bitcoin ATMs not having KYC procedures, and as the operator, you could easily end up holding stuff that was derived from crime. That's a straightforward. And if you don't have a license, you have no firewall defense, whatever. He's also being charged with various things related to forgery, which I think are only in an ancillary sense related to the ATMs, because you can't forge licenses and other documents, and that's not okay. But it has nothing to do with the Bitcoin ATMs. He could have been operating an unlicensed dry cleaners. It wouldn't make any difference, right? Anything where you fake documents is going to be a problem like that. So it's not entirely clear which versions of which things he's being charged with yet. And as far as I can tell, the penalties for these range from small fines. Some things are up to 6 months in jail. But one version of the proceeds of crime one is 14 years in prison. So there's a wide range of possible outcomes here. He's not supposed to appear in court for a little while still. Find out exactly what he's charged with. But it should be interesting. They've taken other action against a couple of other ATM operators in the UK, but not criminally yet, just civil stuff. If you publicly announce that everyone operating in XYZ business area must be operating illegally, and that doesn't get people to stop, you're going to have to take out a bigger stick, right? Whether or not, again, you agree with their licensing regime and the rest of it, if the government's coming out and publicly saying that's the message, you need to stop this now or it's going to get worse for you. And particularly because these are physical machines, you can go find out who owns them, who runs them, who's paying for the thing, who does the service. Because, for example, the government runs the police. So they could say to some police, just, sit outside the machine and see when the service guy comes up and ask him who pays his salary and then go arrest that guy. Right.
The service guy.
This is not the service guy, the guy who runs that, or whoever. But like the surveillance here is, we do some blockchain intelligence, data forensics analysis, whatever, and that may be complicated and need math or computers or whatever, spreadsheets, something, a database.
It needs electricity.
But telling the police to go, wait at a location for the service person to come up, show them their police credentials, and ask who his boss is. That's standard police work. I mean, the police can do that easily if it's a priority for them to do that.
Indeed.
And it will get done.
Yes.
And then they'll find you because, of course they will. So it's interesting. Such a sort of brazen violation. Not huge amounts, but like you can't just openly defy things in that way.
Well, also the use of physical devices at fixed locations. Well, not fixed. I mean, you can move these machines around. Was always going to be the weak link.
There used to be some machines here. They're all gone now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
I remember seeing them.
Yeah,
they were
I recall
around
seeing them
for
as
a
well.
while. I don't remember what the licensing regime was, but then they were all
told to go away,
and
and then they've all disappeared. They've all gone back to Australia, where all Bitcoin comes from. So, on that note,
it's a mining joke for those of you not familiar with.
So, on that note, let's take a look at a bit of data. But before that, one of the things that you may or may not have caught this past week was that the Wall Street Journal, with some excellent reporting by Angus Berwick and Ben Foldy, we're basically talking about Tether and its use cases in countries which are, I mean, it's not a completely one-sided story. There are situations where because of hyperinflation in the local economy, the population has leaned on tethers to kind of bolster themselves against the pace of inflation in places like Argentina, Venezuela, and the rest of it. But at the same time...
Well, so let me just say, I not even think it's just a hyperinflation problem. There's a generic issue in emerging markets where the currency is not freely convertible.
Correct.
And they're export-focused economies, and the elites associated with the government hand out the spoils of the exports to people connected to the government. This is just alleging emerging markets are corrupt sometimes, right? That's a thing, right? The farm workers, factory workers sell stuff overseas, and the local upper class take most of the profits. That's emerging markets forever, right? That's not about any specific country.
It's not. Yeah, right? That's right.
So these people are just getting screwed because lots of countries have worked that way for hundreds of years. That's poor countries.
Yeah. So it was an interesting piece because it looked at it was extremely well researched. They spent a long time on it, and they got a whole bunch of data, and they used our data as well. A little bit of a plug. We're the only data service provider that they used. But anyway, so some of the data they went through, basically, we were asked how many, and this is to do with Tether's blacklisting and how many addresses were blacklisted, and how much went through those addresses and how much left. So some of the stuff that they did leave out.
Should we summarize the data at least?
Yes, I am going to summarize the data. So basically, there were 2,713 wallets that were blacklisted by Tether. So our standard for blacklisting basically means, so you may not know this, but Tether regularly blacklists wallets and then removes them from a blacklist. So if that's the case, we usually don't count that as being a blacklisted wallet because sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes there are false reports, stuff like that. So we only...
Yeah, we're fascinated if anybody has more stories about that. We're genuinely curious because we don't really know.
So we only factor in wallets which have been blacklisted by Tether and continue to be blacklisted at the time of observation. So it's entirely possible that after that time of observation, some of these wallets then go on to be unblacklisted and then the flows can flow freely through. So at the time of observation, so the Wall Street Journal study was between January 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2024. And at that time of observation, what were the flows? So there were 2,713 addresses on Tron and Ethereum, and we narrowed down to these two blockchains simply because that's like 98% of all Tether flow. So there is a little bit on other chains, but it's not significant. It's not
certainly not in 2019, right?
Yeah, and the problem with that, of course, is that if you include the new chains, then it kind of skews some of the data you get from the old the chains that have existed for a long time. So let me just give you some numbers before I jump into the visual data, and these numbers may startle you. So between January 1st, 2018 and June 30th, 2024, on Ethereum blockchain, wallets blacklisted by Tether received a total of $5.15 billion, thereabouts. And then they sent out a total of about $4.17 billion. So about just shy of $1 billion remained locked in those wallets blacklisted by Tether on Ethereum. So about 989.2 million to be exact. That represents about 19% of all tethers on Ethereum. So if you want to talk about blacklisting efficacy...
Well, no, 19% of all Tether. 19%
of all tethers that got blacklisted. Yeah, they got frozen.
So assuming the address has been controlled by the bad guy the whole time, 20% of their money got caught.
Correct, which is okay. I mean, it's not zero, Now let me give you the figures for Tron. So over that same period, yeah, and you're not listening. This is not wrong. Yeah, these addresses received a total of $147.7 billion. Remember, on Ethereum it was 5.15. On Tron it was 147.7 billion, and they also sent a total of 147.3 billion. Again, that's 147.3 billion. Only 375.9 million remains locked in those blacklisted wallets. So if you want to crunch those numbers, Tether managed to freeze about 0.26% of all Tethers.
Well, of the flows through those wallets,
Yeah.
assuming they were always the same bad guy.
Yeah, on the Tron blockchain. Now we also accounted for things like where it was sent to get burned. So if it got burned and stuff like that. Tether does burn.
Yeah, it's worth noting that they can blacklist wallets. They can also just take your money and burn it and
Yeah.
move it somewhere else.
Correct.
That's not done as often. But
It's not done as often. So the factoring in that amount actually it's not significant. So even if we added that on, it doesn't really change the figure all that much. But they do actually send they do send some, even if a wallet has been blacklisted, Tether themselves can then send it to the burn address and sort of get rid of it. But those amounts are not anywhere close. Even if there were errors on that amount, it's not significant. It's tiny. Yeah, so 99.74% of all Tether that was on Tron made it past the gates. And this is not a commentary on Tether, mind you. It's just something to take note of because it's difficult, right? Because when an address has been blacklisted by authorities, or whatever the case may be, there is a lag time, and it takes some time before Tether or Circle or whoever is issuing these centralized stablecoins to do something about it. It's not like, there you go, we get them, we freeze the thing in a matter of hours and minutes. Tether famously has a very lean staff count, so it's not likely.
But they're quicker than Circle. A Circle requires a court order,
Correct,
legal.
correct.
So they're presumably Circle's got more staff, but they're openly less responsive.
Again, this is not a commentary or a critique on any of.
It's data, empirical data.
Yeah,
about
it's
how
empirical
the world
data. It's
operates.
not. Yeah, so I'm not saying that one approach is better than the other, because if you think about it as well, in some cases, and we've heard, but I don't know how true these stories are, where people who've had their tethers kind of like frozen and they feel like it's unjustified because they had nothing to do with it, they don't even know what's going on. We don't know. So let's just look at some of the data, just so that we can have. Okay, so this is interesting. So this is a bunch of wallets that were blacklisted by Israel. Somewhere in the summer of 2022, I think. And then I was curious.
Oh, sorry. So they were on the Israeli blacklist.
That's right.
In the summer of, well before the whatever stuff from a year ago that
the troubles in Palestine.
But they only got blacklisted by Tether after that fighting began.
So October 7th is when the unfortunate things happened.
Incidents, yeah.
Yeah. So Tether blacklisted all these addresses somewhere around here, October 14th. But you can see how much made it out the door. Like the minute.
Sorry, and there's no flows before the 7th. Is that right?
No. So I'm only looking at flows after the 7th. So there are flows before the 7th as well. But one of the things that you do see like really ramp up is, and that's why I ignored the first half, is because there's like muted flows. But the minute Hamas went on that little
that's interesting.
That little sojourn, the amounts that came out of these wallets just shot up like nuts.
Oh, wow. So presumably these guys knew or gals, whatever, knew that they were on the Israel published blacklists.
Yeah.
But they could still transact Tether, and following these events, they realized that's going to stop soon. We need to get this.
We need to
somewhere
get
else.
That's
a fascinating.
We need to hustle. So these are not huge sums, about 1.8 million, and then 2.5 million the next day, and then a little bit like some shrapnel towards the end.
Like the money we still have, we got to get rid of. We got to get rid
of it.
We got to get rid of it.
We got to find a way to get out. Find a way to get out. Now, bear in mind, they had to think this through because so the one question you'd ask is why not take everything out in one transaction. Well, then I've got a simple question to ask you: who suggests that? Where are you going to send it to?
Yeah, you got to offer. If you just move it to a different address, they just freeze that one.
Yeah.
You got to offer
It's like
it
it's like a whack-a-mole thing, right? You have to figure out.
Yeah.
You have to have a plan in place. Yeah. You have to I'm not telling you how to do this, but basically you have to have a plan in place to get this.
It looks like the plan for the last 5 days only had 250 grand a day of capacity.
Yeah,
really,
looks like it.
Yeah.
It looks like it couldn't really breach that.
It couldn't do much more.
It couldn't do much more than that. It couldn't do more than half a million, definitely. But this on a data chart, this is what that looks like, and that was interesting. And again, Israel's blacklist was unfortunately it was in an OCR mode, so it's not even machine readable. Yeah. So I mean, this is a complicated question. Like, to what extent do you want to recognize the blacklisting of any specific nation state? I don't know.
No, but it's a great illustration of how, if your argument is that a transparent system where blacklisting is the security mechanism is better than whatever, something else, this is an example of how adversarial this really is, and how you have to model your adversary, the guy trying to use the address you want to stop, as a smart, capable, creative person. In this case, Tether hadn't blocked these addresses yet. The users of these addresses were pretty clearly aware that they were on a watch list, such as it is, and that once this stuff happened on October 7th, that they were going to get shut down soon, and they needed to get this money out. So that really, a lot of people sort of like, we need to be more constructive, everybody should be on the same team. No. If you want to model how blacklisting works, you need to think of the guy you're trying to catch as a creative, capable, smart adversary who will undertake strategies like this to get their money out. And you need to show that your scheme works in the face of that, not in the face of somebody that has no idea what's going on and just gets randomly slapped with blacklists out of nowhere. It's a great illustration of that problem. Yeah.
So now let's look at a little bit more data. So this is, again, I started off at January 1st, 2018. This one goes a little bit further. This one goes up to August 30th, 2024. This is on a daily basis, just to give you a rough idea, days of the week and stuff like that. What on any single given day, what's the most number of addresses that Tether is blacklisted? Not about amounts, just a simple number of wallets. So if you dive down into this, one of the things that's often surprised us is that we've seen addresses which get blacklisted that have essentially no activity. Right.
There must be errors. There
was really, literally no activity. Yeah. So I have no idea what's going on there. And then if you want to look at the first time that something was blacklisted, this is actually on Ethereum. So even though this chart is a multi-chain chart, the first one's actually on Ethereum on June 9th. Yeah, June 9th, 2018.
Those were testing, right? They blacklisted.
Yes. So that looked like a test. And then we saw a couple more, but all these again looked like tests. There was 5 in somewhere in January. January 2019 and one January 19. So not a lot going on. You have a little bit of action here. Of course, there was this one single day, a day that will live in infamy, October 6, 2022. So do you guys recall what happened around that period of time?
Is this the FTX hack?
This was basically around the time that FTX had all of its issues, just coming up to about 2 years ago. So on a single day, October 6, 2022, this is all these times and dates are in GMT, Tether actually blacklisted 268.
This was the big pig butchering scam joint thing?
I don't know necessarily that
there was a press release about something.
I don't necessarily know that those things have anything to do with this, but that was, there was a lot of stuff going on. There was
a press release then around something like that.
There was a lot of stuff going on around that period of time. So that's what we have. And then now let's look at it on a monthly basis. Again, if you look at it from a monthly basis,
the trend's pretty clear here.
Well, it's a lot more blacklisting. Also, there are some theories that U.S. government is now kind of deeply embedded with Tether, has agents, something like that. And I guess that would be consistent with some sort of an increase. But again, those are the speculations.
There's a clear regime change here in
somewhere around 2020.
Right. So this is 2020, early 2020,
to
actually start doing this. So they start getting requests to blacklist. So presumably, a lot of the Tether explosion that began around the same time that COVID stuff began in early 2020, didn't lead to much for a while, and then they started getting complaints, requests, whatever, for some reason for freezing. There was some kind of regime change here. and then you can see that there was some kind of regime change in late 2023 here, where the amounts just step up dramatically.
Yeah. And again, if you just go over that bar here, again, that's October 2022.
So all the blacklisting was in fact that one day.
Yeah, okay. Most of it.
All 282 was okay.
So 268 on that single day, and then for the whole month it was 282. So most of it, almost every wallet that was blacklisted happened on that in that.
And these, if you look at sort of the number of active addresses, which the exact amount doesn't matter, it's millions. You look at these are hundreds. Do you think that only 200 out of 2 million addresses are bad people? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But, those are not huge numbers, and you're probably getting a sense of the challenges of a human-administered system doing some of this.
So, and which is what the Wall Street Journal actually says. It's blacklisting is a bit oftentimes like closing the proverbial barn door after the horse has bolted. So it's. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. It's difficult. And unless you have precogs, how are you gonna know?
If you want to block the use by a certain entity
then you gotta
of a network, but they can create addresses for free, you can't catch them in advance. You can't catch them 100% of the time. That's a fairly straightforward construct.
Which is why I was, and now I'm gonna.
100% is maybe not the right goal. Yeah, it's too high, but
it's an unreasonable threshold. We can't all be Tay-Tay. So, but one of and this is one of the things which confused me on the day. The Wall Street Journal acknowledges this issue, and they called it it's like a game of whack-a-mole, and which is why on the day that the Wall Street Journal issued this newspaper article. Was the same day that TRM Labs, which is a blockchain intelligence firm as well, announced a partnership with Tron, the blockchain, and Tether to use TRM Labs blockchain intelligence to fight financial crime. I found that interesting.
Well, I mean, look, in one sense, doing better than 0.26% catch rate is definitely possible. I mean, that's a
low bar.
Low bar, right? So these people can probably do better, yeah. But you do kind of have to question if that's the right way to do things. I mean, maybe they're doing an awful job and they can get from 0.2 whatever percent to 40%. I'm not sure. I think that's possible.
I think 40 basis points is a good place to start.
Okay, 40 basis points is not nearly. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So I was surprised by that because. Yeah, I'm sure OJ knows who's I'm sure OJ can help out with finding the killers.
Too soon.
Okay, so it's strange. I would just remark that it's strange. I'm not saying that it's companies are entitled to do what they want to do. I just found it interesting and a bit peculiar that so maybe they have access to the precogs.
Well, I mean, there is a general optimism about a lot of these things where people believe that you can make stuff more efficient and tracing more effective and better financial crime prevention, whatever. So I think we'd like to be clear that we're saying two things at once. One of them is you can absolutely do better than is currently being done, and everyone believes the technology can do better than that, right? Because empirically what's happening on a lot of these chains, I mean, this is Tether on Tron, which we've written about for years, the amount that's being caught is absurdly low, and clearly you can do better than that, whether that's an issue of technology, seriousness, caring, responsiveness, whatever. But it's probably, given you have this empirical data out there, it's worth people considering whether you think this type of system can ever get to be good enough, right? Because again, here, all the addresses Patrick was talking about being blacklisted were created on computers for free, because you can just create addresses at scale for free, and you can move among different addresses basically for free. On Tron, it's genuinely free a lot of the time. When you talk about traditional finance and bank accounts, the rate of growth of bank accounts tracks the rate of growth of the population.
In general.
Right? And you can't just show up at a bank and say, I want 14 bank accounts. That's just not you don't keep going back to the same bank, opening many more accounts for yourself. Right? So you have some fraction of accounts that are a problem, and that's naturally kind of under control because the whole process of creating them is bandwidth limited. When you remove that limitation and let people create accounts on their own, you kind of have to question whether it's even possible to do a really good job. Because that 1%, say, of bad actors is going to create accounts at a rate that wildly exceeds population growth because they can. And then all of a sudden they could be 50% of accounts. Right? And those types of systems that people conceptualize with that natural bandwidth limiting thing going on, right? Those may not be the right mental frameworks, legal frameworks, to deal with problems in that context. And you can see that here. They're only blacklisting hundreds of addresses a day, a week, a month. We're not saying that these guys should just work harder and blacklist 50,000 addresses a month. That's not the way this is ever going to work. So you might want to step back and think whether that's actually the right way to do things. Doing better than 0.2% is clearly a step forward, but it may be possible that you just can't get somewhere good without making some other compromises, some other changes.
And to that end, I question whether or not, like any blockchain intelligence firm, unless they have access to the precogs, what is their ability to really preemptively stop some of these things? I mean, like, to stop the bleed. Like, let's say, for instance, the Israel blacklists were out there for a while, at least 4 or 5 months before Tether actually acted to freeze these addresses. So,
which to be clear is must be some combination of caring, communication, and capacity.
Yeah.
Right. Because there can be no other explanation. Right. They didn't read the lists. They didn't care about the list. They didn't know about the list. They weren't asked about the list, or they didn't have enough manpower to implement the list. It's something like that.
So having a service provider take a look at that, sure. Beyond that, I don't know. You got to show me the precogs, and I'll believe it. For those of you who don't know what the reference for precog is, go watch Minority Report. It is perhaps the second best movie after Avatar, because everybody knows Avatar is the best movie.
Okay. I've never seen Avatar, but I don't think Minority Report has that kind of a reputation. I've seen it. It's fine. I've watched it on an airplane. No, more seriously, these things are hard. The Wall Street Journal reporting is excellent, and they cover a lot of end user use cases of people and businesses that are doing things that are almost certainly, at least nominally, illegal. But, some guy in a Latin American country with restricted currency that doesn't have access to reasonable savings vehicles wants to find a way to transact in dollars outside of government control. It's not that we aren't sympathetic to these people, right? And something we've said many times that you can be supportive, sympathetic, whatever, want to help, fine. But suggesting that the solution is for people to do things at scale that are illegal in the place that they live, you probably want to question whether you're really, in the end, doing more harm than good. All right. So if you gave these people this facility, and there were also discussions about how corruption in some of those countries related to using the same tools caused a lot of people to get in trouble, you may end up just getting the whole thing shut down and them losing access entirely to it. Anyway, suggesting people commit crimes in the country that they live in, when they're already on the receiving end of bad treatment, is probably not a long-term solution for much. We're sympathetic to these problems. We just, we question whether this is actually the right way to solve any of these problems.
Oh, it's a bit like, saying to the villagers, if you used an RPG-7 to go fishing in the lagoon, you probably catch a lot more fish.
Well, okay.
But then, you could also use an RPG-7 for a whole bunch of other things.
I'll be a little more on point and say, if the idea is to provide people with reliable savings vehicles that are outside of government, whatever, control, and the other use case that's using the same system is criminals trying to exfiltrate profits and launder money. Well, the criminals don't care about the long-term stability of the system. They care about their ability to use it now, right? So if those guys run a bunch of money through to clean it, to export it, to whatever, exfiltrate it, that may result in it never being usable as a long-term savings vehicle, because it's not going to last 20 years for this guy's savings to, make it to having been savings, if it's going to get blown up by a bunch of money launderers in the interim. That's just not that product is not fit for purpose, because it will never last long enough to serve as a meaningful savings vehicle. And you're seeing that conflict play out, right? That most of what they were talking about was either large, high-scale, international crime, corruption type stuff, or retail users on the ground. And the guys at the top stealing the huge amounts of money could definitely transfer the money to an actual bank somewhere. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right? They don't care about the long-term stability of the system. And you may not even be serving the users that you do care about by doing it this way.
I sometimes worry that was not the intention anyway. But that's my head. So anyway, on that note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for catching the podcast, and thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you next week. Again, keep all those likes, comments, and subscribes coming. We do appreciate it when you do that. If you have any other content suggestions, I think there were a couple of them on the comments from a couple of videos past. We will look through them. They will go through a rigorous vetting process, presented for a committee, and then the committee will decide whether or not we can talk about them.
This committee is you, I assume.
Anyway, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.